Many of you who are watching this video right now are not subscribed to the Audio Brewers channel, so if you find this content useful or if you find any of our products useful in your workflow, don't hesitate to hit subscribe below and help this channel grow. My name is Alejandro and we are the Audio Brewers. In the beginning of last year, I released a video where I explored every single DAW and their capabilities when it came to mixing immersive music, and especially Dolby Atmos. Well, 12 months have passed, new versions, new features, new capabilities. Every single DAW has changed, and so I decided that it was a good moment to redo this video. Let's find which the best DAW is for 2025 when it comes to mixing immersive music and especially Dolby Atmos. Let's start by talking about what I'm going to be testing here, but before that I want to say that this video is my personal opinion and I know that you might have a different opinion, and if you do, I encourage you to write it down in the comment section below. I will do my best to read all your comments and keep them in mind for my future videos. Also, I want to say that this video is not about exploring DAWs for things such as composing music or arranging music or tracking music or sound design. This is merely about mixing for Dolby Atmos. So what I'm going to be exploring here is the native support each DAW has for surround sound, for immersive audio, for Ambisonics audio, and for Dolby Atmos music. Additionally, I want to explore alternative ways that you can use for achieving things that you might not be able to achieve with the tools that come included in the DAW. So I'm just gonna grab a random DAW, I'm just gonna explore it, and at the very end of the video, I'm gonna rank them all. I'm just gonna go to the DAW now and start exploring them all. In 2024, Reaper 7 was released. I gotta say that I wasn't expecting many features, as I am afraid that sometimes newer features translate into a more bloated or expensive DAW. Well, Reaper 7 is here, and it's still very cheap, and it's still very fast and lightweight, and it's still very snappy, and I still love it. And now it supports tracks of up to 128 channels, which is pretty insane. So to summarize, yes, you can work with surround sound in Reaper, you can work with Ambisonics audio in Reaper up to 7th order or even beyond, since you have support for 128 channel tracks now. It still doesn't have a native Dolby Atmos renderer, but for its price is pretty understandable, and you can still use the Dolby Atmos composer for mixing in Dolby Atmos and creating three-dimensional objects with it. Let's go to Reaper and explore how you can achieve all these things. So as you can see here, the interface of Reaper hasn't changed at all since version 6, which is great, and I'm going to prepare my session to be my Dolby Atmos session. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my master bus, and in the track channels, I'm going to set an amount that will match my studio. In this case, it's a 714 speaker array, so it's 12 speakers. And for that, I'm going to set the track channels to be 12. And the same with the speakers, I'm going to set them to be 12 so that they go to channels 1 through 12. And now I'm going to insert the Dolby Atmos composer in my master bus. By inserting Dolby Atmos Composer in my master track, I am ensuring that whatever audio is going to be sent through the Dolby Atmos beam is going to go to my Dolby Atmos Composer. So in the Dolby Atmos Composer, I'm going to do a couple of tweaks here. One of them is going to be to set my speakers to match that of my studio. In my case, it will be 714, but because I'm doing this video for YouTube, and I want you to hear, and YouTube only supports stereo audio, I'm just going to set this to stereo. Additionally, I'm going to disable the headphone monitoring mode, because that means that it will send an extra 2 tracks to my channels 3 and 4 so that somebody can hear it with headphones, but I'm not interested in that for now, so I'm just going to disable that. And so now what I'm going to do is simply insert different types of audio files, and I'm going to address them as audio on the bed and audio as independent objects. So the first thing I'm going to do is to insert an ordinary stereo audio file. And as you can see, if I press play, nothing is going to sound. And that is because there is no beam inserted in my track. Right now, because I have my Dolby Atmos composer in my master file, every single track that I want to use in my Dolby Atmos mix has to have a beam inserted so that it sends the audio to the Dolby Atmos composer. So I'm going to load the Dolby Atmos beam. And on the Dolby Atmos beam, I'm going to set the composite to 712, which is the width of my bed. That means that right now I'm sending my stereo audio to my 10-channel bed. So if I press play, you will hear that everything is coming through my bed. You can see that right now I'm only using channels 1 and 2 because it's left and right. And if I were to pan this, I will be using the other channels of my bed, and that is pretty cool. However, I don't want to send this audio to my bed. I want to create a stereo object. To do that in the Dolby Atmos Composer is pretty easy. All I have to do is change the pan mode from composite to objects. And as soon as I do that, you can see that now I am grabbing two extra objects that are aside from my bed. And now these two objects represent the channels left and right from my audio file. So if I press play, the sound is gonna come through there. And like that, I'm now telling the audio decoder of the person who is going to be listening to my mix that this is not part of the bed and instead is two objects that are somewhere in my space. Equally, I can just pan this anywhere I want. And these objects are now three-dimensional, so it doesn't matter if the person is going to be listening in a 714 or in a stereo or in a headphone array, they're always going to be decoded for their needs, and that is pretty cool. So this is my stereo object. So now let's insert another type of audio file. I'm just going to delete this track and create a new track, and this time I'm going to insert a 714 audio file. And again, just like that, nothing will be heard because I haven't inserted the beam. You can see that there is no audio. And so as soon as I insert the beam, you can see that the beam now is identifying the audio as a 714 file, which is great, which is what I want. And you can see all the speakers here. So if I press play, all this audio is going to go to my bed. And again, I can simply select all my speakers and rotate them so that I can grab all this 714 audio file and just rotate it around the head of the listener. Which is great. However, let's say that I just want to create a three-dimensional object. In this case, this object will be 714, which is the pretty amazing thing about Dolby Atmos, that objects can also be three-dimensional. And that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to change the pan mode from composite to objects, and that way I'm not going to be using the bed for this audio file. And you can see that now I am grabbing all the objects I need so that I can fulfill the needs of my track. So if I press play, the audio is now going to come through the objects. And again, I can just manipulate this object somewhere in the three-dimensional field. And the cool thing about this is that, again, the audio is not being baked into the 712 bed. This is audio that is the raw objects, and the information of their location is being sent to the decoder that your listener is going to have. And this is why it's pretty cool to have a three-dimensional object. Now let's move to Ambisonics audio. As you know, Ambisonics audio is channel agnostic, so it can be anything. So I'm going to start with a first-order Ambisonics file. Because the first-order Ambisonics file is channel agnostic, I have to make sure that before I am sending it to the beam, it has to be decoded to a channel layout. First-order Ambisonic files contain 4 channels. So the first thing I'm going to do is to insert a decoder. In this case, I'm going to insert our AB decoder. And then I'm going to change the width of my track to match what I want the width of my object to be. So if I wanted this object to be a 5.1 object, I will need 6 channels. If I wanted a 916 object, I will need 16 channels. So I'm going to do that. Let's just say that I'm going to create a 5.1 object. So I'm going to use 6 channels. And you can see that the AB decoder automatically detects that this is a 5.1 track. And finally, I will have to insert the beam. And after I inserted the beam, you can see that this is a 5.1 track, because you can see here that you have the 5 speakers and they are being sent to the bed. So if I press play, you will see the sound going to the bed. And you can see that it works pretty well. However, I want again to create a 3-dimensional object because in the end, I don't want this to be baked on a 712 bed. This defeats the purpose of Dolby Atmos and object-based audio. So all I have to do is change the pan mode to be objects. And after doing that, you will see that now I am grabbing the objects that I need for my track. And like that, I can manipulate my audio in any way I want, either from the decoder or either from the Dolby Atmos beam. It doesn't really matter, depending on where you want all the changes to be. So if I press play, and like that, you have a 3-dimensional object that in this case is a 5.1 object from a first order Ambisonics track. If I wanted something bigger, all I will have to do is increase the width of my track. So let's just say that I want a 16 channel track. And you will see that automatically the AB decoder is going to suggest a 916 configuration. And automatically the Dolby Atmos beam is going to understand that now this is a 916 type of file. So you will see that you have all your channels here. And again, you can just manipulate them however you want. And like that, you get your 916 3-dimensional object. This is great if you own an Ambisonics microphone and you want to create a 3-dimensional mix using a recording that you have done with the microphone. There is no point on having an Ambisonics microphone to decode to stereo and then send it back to be an object from a stereo stream. I mean, you already have the 3-dimensional recording. So now let's move on to something a little bit more complex, which will be our third order Ambisonics file. Again, just like the first order Ambisonics file, the third order Ambisonics file is speaker agnostic. So before inserting the beam, you have to decode it to something. The difference between the first order Ambisonics and the third order Ambisonics recording is its resolution. With the third order Ambisonics, you get a much better resolution when it comes to spatial awareness of whatever is happening around your head. So for this, I'm going to insert our higher order decoder. And because the track is already 16 channels, because the third order Ambisonics file is 16 channels, the decoder is suggesting a 916 output, which is what I'm going to be using. And then I'm going to insert the beam to this track. And you can see that the beam is also understanding that this is a 916 track, so there is nothing I have to do. It is already sending all my audio to my bed. So if I press play, everything is going to go to my bed. Let's check it out. So you can see that the audio is going to my bed, and again, just like before, I can grab all the speakers and change the rotation and manipulate the position of this audio. And like that, you can bake your audio into your bed. But let's just say that I don't want to bake anything into my bed. I want to create a 3-dimensional object. Well, with the Dolby Atmos Composer, you can do that just like I did before in the pan mode. Just change from composite to objects. And you will see that now I am grabbing all the objects I need to fulfill the needs of this track. And everything is now being sent to the object and not to the bed. And like that, you're creating a 3-dimensional object from a third order Ambisonics file. Now, what happens if I have a 7th order Ambisonics mix? Let's try it out. In Reaper, all you have to do is drag the file to your project. And you can see that your track is now 64 channels, just like a 7th order Ambisonics track. So again, to beam this to the Dolby Atmos Composer, you need to decode it first. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to insert our higher order decoder. And again, I'm going to leave this as a 916 speaker layout. And so I'm going to insert the beam next. And after inserting the beam, I don't have to do anything else. Everything is going to my bed. So if I press play, the audio is going to the Dolby Atmos bed. But again, let's just say that I want to create a three-dimensional object with this, because in the end, this is Dolby Atmos, this is object-based audio. All I have to do is go to my pan mode and change from composite to objects. And you will see that the Dolby Atmos composer is already receiving the objects that I need. So if I press play again, I can play with the rotation of my 7th order Ambisonics audio on my Dolby Atmos mix. And that is pretty cool. I have now a 7th order Ambisonics mix, which is a very, very high resolution 3-dimensional mix, which contains all the information that is happening around your head. I am decoding that from 7th order Ambisonics to 916, which is the widest channel layout that a Dolby Atmos mix can have. And then I am converting that to a 916 3-dimensional object. This, to me, is what 3-dimensional music is all about. There is no point on baking everything on the bed. If you're going to bake everything on the bed, to me, you are not doing anything beyond just using traditional surround sound. It's better just to have these objects sent as they are to the decoder of the person who is going to be listening to your music, and it is there that is going to be decoded to their ears. And so this is Reaper. It's a really, really nice DAW. I am really biased towards it because I really, really like it. It's very fast, it's really lightweight, and it's really cheap. So you can absolutely take advantage of Reaper and combine it with the Dolby Atmos Composer and with our plugins for creating really, really immersive mixes. When it comes to Steinberg, I could be talking either about Nuendo or Cubase. Nuendo is more focused to cinema, Cubase is more focused to music, and for my personal workflow, I haven't really found any difference between the Cubase 14 that was released just a month ago and the Nuendo 13 that was released much earlier. Maybe there are many differences when it comes to the post-production world, but when it comes to mixing music in Dolby Atmos, it's pretty much the same. Nuendo or Cubase, whatever, Steinberg is a DAW that I really, really like because it comes with everything I need included. It has support, native support for surround sound. It has native support for Dolby Atmos. It contains a Dolby Atmos renderer. It has native support for 3-dimensional objects, and it has native support for Ambisonics from 1st order all the way to 4th order. Why till 4th order? I have no idea. I still am expecting them to eventually support Ambisonics up to 7th order to take advantage of the insane resolution that the 7th order has. However, right now, only support until 4th order Ambisonics. So let's just jump in the DAW and see how we can set this mix up. So I have here an empty project, and the first thing I'm going to do to prepare my Dolby Atmos mix is to go to the project and to the ADM authoring. And I'm going to go to the setup assistant of Dolby Atmos, and I'm just going to check everything and press OK. And now my Dolby Atmos mix has been created. You can see that Cubase has created a standard bed and the renderer track, and all I have to do now is simply direct the renderer outputs to my physical speaker array. So if you have a 714 speaker array, you can just simply route everything to your 714. But if you are using a stereo or a 5.1 array, I suggest you just route the channels that you need, and then in the down mix of the Dolby Atmos renderer, you set that to match either your speaker setup or lower. So for example, if you have 5.1, just go to 5.1 or stereo, or if you have 714, you can use 714 or lower all the way to stereo. In my case, I have a 714 system, and so I'm going to just wire everything to my speaker array. So now that everything has been routed to my 714 array, my Dolby Atmos mix is ready. I can start working on my Dolby Atmos mix. So again, let's just start by inserting an ordinary stereo file to my mix. And as I insert my stereo file, and if I press play, you can see that you cannot hear anything because this track has to either go to my bed or it has to be converted to an object. So the first thing I'm going to do is send it to my bed. And so if I press play now, again, you can see that my audio is going to my bed in a stereo mode, meaning channels 1 and 2. And so if I open the panel of this stereo file, I can just move this around my head. So again, because I'm using YouTube and YouTube doesn't support 714 speaker arrays, I'm just going to downmix everything I do to stereo. And like that, I'm going to make sure that whatever I do, you can hear it on your speakers. So now if I rotate my signal, you can see that now any change I do is going correctly to the bed, everything is being translated properly to the bed, and everything works fine. However, let's just convert this stereo track to an object. And what I do here, just to keep everything a little bit organized, is just send whatever is my mix channels to the right. In my case, it's going to be these two. And like that, I can just have them on the side and my tracks and my objects to the left. So let's convert this to an object. All I have to do this is go again to my ADM authoring and select the track I want to convert to an object. And then in functions, I create an object from selected tracks. Once I do that, you can see that now 2 objects have been selected, and now my audio is going to those 2 objects. And now whatever change I do is going to be in the metadata of the Dolby Atmos file and not baked in the bed. So I can rotate my sound again. And even if I expand my panel so that I can see the 3 dimensions, I can also lift my object. And you can see that whatever change I do here is being reflected in the object view, which is pretty cool. And all my objects are being kept as objects and they're not being baked in the Dolby Atmos bed. So that's great. So this is how you create a stereo object with Cubase 14. Now let's move on to 3-dimensional objects. So for doing this, I'm just going to remove this track and I'm going to insert my 714 file. For that, first I'm going to create a 714 track. And I'm going to drag my audio there. And then I'm going to make sure that my audio is going somewhere. In my case, let's start by going to the bed. So if I press play now, you can see that now my audio is going to the bed. It is a 714 track, but it's going to my 712 bed. And whatever change I do to my track is going to be baked in the bed. So I can rotate it however I want. So that's pretty cool. However, again, I don't want this to be a baked file into a bed. I want it to be a 3-dimensional object. Again, Nuendo or Cubase in this case, supports 3-dimensional objects. It's pretty easy to do. All I have to do is go to my project and go to the ADM authoring. And let me just make sure to delete the previous object that I have already removed. And now I'm just going to create an object from the selected track. And you can see that now I have taken all the objects that I need for this 3-dimensional object. And now any change that I do to this track is going to be a change in the location of the objects. It's not going to be baked on my bed. So again, I can manipulate the rotation of my objects. And whatever I do is being reflected only in the objects. I'm not touching the bed. Everything is dedicated so that the decoder of your listener takes care of the decoding process. It's pretty cool. And this is how you create 3-dimensional objects from a 714 audio file. Now, what happens if I'm using an Ambisonics file? Well, let's move on to that. So the first thing I'm going to do is to simply create a first order ambisonics track. And I'm going to insert my first order ambisonic sound to this track. Again, first order ambisonics audio is speaker agnostic, but again, Nuendo, or in this case Cubase, contains included decoder that is going to take care of decoding your audio to whatever your speaker array is. And so let's start by sending this to my bed. You will see that now everything is converted from first order ambisonics to 712, which is the width of my bed. And if I open the panner, you can see that this panner is a little bit more different. And if I press play, you will see that everything is going to my bed, and I can rotate it using the yaw, the pitch, and the roll. And this is how you rotate your signal. However, I'm going to use the Audio Brewers decoder because I like it a little bit more. This is not really helpful. I cannot see the signal, and I really like seeing the signal. So to do that, I'm just going to right click here and change the decoder to be the AB decoder. And you can see that there's nothing you have to do. You already are sending the signal to your bed, which is 712. So if I press play, I can rotate my signal using the rotator of the decoder. Which is pretty cool. So this is how you decode through your first order ambisonics file to your standard bed. Now, what if I wanted to create a three-dimensional object with this sound? So in Nuendo or Cubase, you cannot create a three-dimensional object directly from an ambisonics track. You first have to send this track to a group that is going to be the width of the object you want it to be, and then from there you are going to create your object. And this is what I'm going to do. So you have to decide from now how you want your ambisonics audio to be in the Dolby Atmos mix. So let's just choose, I don't know, a 5.1. Let's just create a 5.1 object from this first order ambisonics file. So I'm going to create a new group track, which is going to be 5.1. And I'm going to name it 5.1 object. And now I'm going to send my ambisonics audio to my 5.1 object. To do that, all I have to do is, instead of sending it to my bed, I'm going to send it to my object, and the object is going to have to be sent to the bed. So now it's going to be like ambisonics being sent to the 5.1 group track, and then from the group track to the bed. However, I want this to be a three-dimensional object. So now that I have my object, and if I open the decoder, you can see that it is now detecting that it's a 5.1 signal. If I press play, you can see that it's properly being decoded to 5.1. I go to my ADM authoring, and I create an object. Let me just remove the previous object. And I create an object from the group track that I just created. And you can see that now you have a 5.1 object created. And you see the object that is here, and you see that it has taken the objects that are needed. And now it is from this object that I'm going to manipulate my signal. I could manipulate it either from the ambisonics decoder, which is here, or from the panner of Cubase or Nuendo. Doesn't really matter. So now that I have it, now that it's an object, if I press play and I manipulate it, you can see that now your ambisonic signal is a three-dimensional 5.1 object. That is great. So let's move on and work with a third order ambisonics file. Let's just remove these tracks. And I'm going to do something a little bit interesting here. I could insert this third order ambisonics file in a third order ambisonics track, but I'm going to insert it in a fourth order ambisonics track, and I'm going to explain you why. So for doing that, I'm going to create a new track, and I'm going to set it to be fourth order ambisonics. And I'm going to insert my third order ambisonics file into that fourth order ambisonics track. Now my file is third order ambisonics and my track is fourth order ambisonics. I'm going to change the decoder to be our higher order ambisonics decoder. And if I press play, you will see that you only have 16 channels from the third order Ambisonics file that are being decoded. Let me just send it to my bed first. So what I'm going to do now is, you can see that you have a third order Ambisonics file in a fourth order Ambisonics track. I have one order available, and I'm going to use my upscaler to upscale this signal from third order to fourth order so as to increase its spatial resolution. So in the first insert of my fourth order track, I'm going to insert our imager upscaler. And I don't have to do absolutely nothing. All I have to do is just insert it, and if I press play, you will see that now you have a fourth order ambisonic signal coming to your mix. This increases your spatial resolution, especially if you're using like very complex mixes. So it really doesn't cost you anything in CPU power because it's a very lightweight plugin, and it increases your resolution. Now, we can see that this audio is fourth order now and is going to my bed. Now let's create a three-dimensional object with it. So the first thing I'm going to do, just like with the first order Ambisonics file, is to create a group. Just make sure that the group matches whatever you want your object size to be. So I'm going to create a 714 object. So what I have to do is insert a group, which is going to be 714. And now I'm going to send my fourth order Ambisonics audio to that group. And that group, I'm going to send it to my bed. So if I press play, you can see that now the 714 audio is going to my bed. However, as I said before, I want to create a three-dimensional object with this. So for doing that, I am going to go to my ADM. Let me just delete the previous objects. And I'm going to create an object from this 714 audio. So I select the track and I just create an object. And you can see that it has grabbed all the objects. You can see that it has created the three-dimensional object. And you can open the group track and you can now manipulate your three-dimensional object. You can do a bunch of things here because the panel of Nuendo or Cubase is really, really cool. You can very easily place these three-dimensional objects in very different ways, or you can manipulate them in their size, you can expand them, you can shrink them, and that's pretty, pretty cool. And this is where we stop with Cubase or Nuendo because it doesn't have support for 7th order Ambisonics audio. However, because it contains an included Dolby Atmos renderer, and because it contains the possibility of working with Ambisonics audio and with and creating three-dimensional objects, you don't really have the need to use the Dolby Atmos composer if you are using Cubase or Nuendo. So I'm just gonna move on to the next DAW and see what it has to offer. In 2024, PreSonus released the newest version of Studio One version 7, and it's got nothing new, at least nothing in my point of view. I mean, there is some things that have been changed. However, for my workflow of Dolby Atmos mixing, there is nothing really relevant, nothing changed. Studio One is natively compatible with surround sound, is natively compatible with Dolby Atmos, and it's still not natively compatible with Ambisonics audio. However, thanks to the Audio Brewers ecosystem, you can work with Ambisonics up to 3rd order. However, Studio One still doesn't support three-dimensional objects. With that being said, I'm gonna go to the DAW and I'm going to explore what it has to offer us. As you can see here, graphically speaking, there is not much change between Studio One 6 and 7. That is a good thing in my book. And so to prepare our Dolby Atmos mix, the first thing I'm going to do is go to my song menu and to the spatial audio option. And I'm gonna set the mode to be Dolby Atmos. And then in my output format, I want to set an output format that matches my studio. In my case, 714, because I have a 714 array. And as I press OK, you can see that the renderer now pops. I am going to be using this renderer to visualize my mix. You can see here that you have your bed format, and you have your outputs. Now, however, since this is a video that is being done for YouTube and YouTube doesn't support surround sound, I'm going to set my output to be stereo so that you can hear it properly. However, note that you can be changing output formats here in your renderer so that you can check your mix between stereo, 5.1, 7.1.4, so that you are sure that your mix works in all different speakers array. So I'm just going to set it to stereo. And now my Dolby Atmos mix is ready to be worked on. So the first thing I'm going to do is to drag my ordinary stereo file. You can see that the file is going to my bed, and if I open the panel of Studio One, I can manipulate where this file is going to. However, again, I don't want this audio to be sent to my bed. You can see now that as I was panning, everything was going to the bed. I want to create an object from this. And in Studio One, it's very easy to create an object. All you have to do is click here on the track panel and set it to be from surround panel to spatial object panel. And as soon as you do that, now you have your object, and you can see that your stereo object is being located here because it's a stereo object. You can move it using the object panel. So let's do that. You can see now that the changes are much smoother, and you can see also that as I change the position of the object, you can see the position changing also in the viewer of the renderer. That's pretty cool. And this is how you create a two-dimensional object with Studio One. Now, what happens if I have a surround file that I want to work with? Now, let's just remove this track and let's insert a surround file. In this case, a 714 file. And you can see that Studio One automatically detects that it's a 714 file, and if I press play, you can see that it is going properly to my bed. If I open the panel, I can also pan this audio. However, any change that I do here, again, is going to be baked on the bed. What if I wanted to create a three-dimensional object? Well, as you can see, there is no object panel here because Studio One doesn't support three-dimensional objects. Why? I have no idea why. It would be awesome if it could support three-dimensional objects. So you're stuck to using surround files through your bed unless you use the Dolby Atmos Composer, which is something that I'm going to do later. So yeah, whenever you're using information that is already immersive, you cannot create objects from it. It can only go to the bed. How about Ambisonics? So as I told you before, Studio One doesn't have native support for Ambisonics. However, thanks to the Audio Brewers ecosystem, you can work with Ambisonics from first to third order Ambisonics with no problem. So the first thing I'm going to do is to insert a first order Ambisonics file. And if I expand it, you can see here that it is a 4-channel file. You just have to make sure that it is a 4.0 music and not cine music. And after doing that, all you have to do is change the panel from the Studio One panel to one of our decoders. And for doing that, you click here and then you go to Other and you select one of our decoders. In this case, I'm going to select the decoder in higher order. As I open the decoder, you can see that the decoder automatically is creating a 712 signal as it is detecting that my bed is 712 signal. And that's all I have to do. You can pan the sound using the panel of our decoder. So if I press play, That is how you work with first-order Ambisonics files. And what if you have a third-order Ambisonics file? Well, exactly the same way. Studio One doesn't support third-order Ambisonics files natively. However, thanks to the Audio Brewers ecosystem, you can give support to them. If I insert this file, which is third-order Ambisonics, you can see that it's 16 channels, and you just have to make sure that Studio One has identified it as a 916 track. And equally, all you have to do is change the panner to be our higher order decoder. So you click here and in other, and then you just set the AB decoder higher order. And as I open it, you will see that now you have, again, your output to be 712, which is your bed. And if I were to press play, you can see that now you have your 712 signal, which is going to your bed, being decoded from a third-order Ambisonics file. And if you wanted to rotate it, all you have to do is just simply use the rotator of our decoder. So again, because this is immersive audio, Studio One doesn't support three-dimensional objects natively, so you're stuck here. Additionally, you cannot create tracks that are wider than 16 channels. This means that you are stuck to third-order Ambisonics support, so there is no seventh-order support. This is all you can do here. Now, what about using the Dolby Atmos Composer to create three-dimensional objects? It's completely doable. So for doing that, I'm just gonna go back to the beginning and remove this track. And remove the Dolby Atmos Spatial Audio and set it back to be surround. And now I'm going to insert in my master track the Dolby Atmos Composer. And you can see that the Dolby Atmos Composer is just a very simple plugin. You can see all the 128 objects. You can see the list where your objects and your tracks are going to appear. It's ready to work with. So again, I'm just gonna go back and add my ordinary stereo file. And if I press play, you will notice that there is no audio playing, and that is because now that I have the Dolby Atmos Composer in my master bus, I have to insert the beam in every single track of my Dolby Atmos mix, because the beam is going to be sending the audio to the Dolby Atmos Composer. So you just work in your mix normally, and at the very last insert, you insert the beam. So that's what I'm going to do now. So as I insert the beam, if I set the width to be 712, which is the width of my bed, you can see that now you have this track here, which is being received by the beam. And if I press play, you have the audio going to the bed. Again, you can rotate this audio. And it will work with no problem. So if you want to create an object with this stereo audio, all you will have to do is set the pan mode to be from composite to the objects. And you will see that now you are grabbing two objects, which is the left and right channels of my stereo sound. And if I press play, it is only those two objects that are going to be playing. And again, you can rotate your objects on your Dolby Atmos mix. Which is pretty cool, because that means that now the position of the object is not being baked on the bed and instead is being sent to the decoder of your listener. So what happens if I have a surround audio format? Let's just insert the 714 file that we had before. And again, if I press play, you won't have any audio because you need to insert the beam, and that's what I'm going to do now. And so as I insert the beam, you can see that you have all the speakers of your 7.1.4 file. And if I press play, everything is gonna go to the bed. Works pretty well. However, if I wanted to create a three-dimensional object, which is what this is all about, all I have to do is simply set the pan mode from being from composite to objects. And as I do it, you can see that now my Dolby Atmos Composer is grabbing all the objects necessary for this track. And this is what a three-dimensional object is. Why doesn't Studio One support three-dimensional objects? I have no idea, I have no clue, but it would be great if it did. So now that I have my three-dimensional object, I can just manipulate the positions of this three-dimensional object, and everything I do position-wise is going to be kept, not baked, but kept as metadata, and is going to be sent to the decoder of the person who is listening to your music. And that is pretty cool. So what happens if I'm working in Ambisonics? Let's go and open our Ambisonics file. So as I insert my first order Ambisonics file, the first thing I'm going to do is insert a decoder. The decoder has to be inserted down here on the panel. And if I press play, you can see that there is a signal going out, but there is no sound, and that is because I have to insert the beam. So there is a problem here, that the beam has to be inserted after the decoder, and the decoder is already our last insert because it's our panel. So how do we send this data to the Dolby Atmos composer? Well, I'm gonna have to send my decoded signal to a new track, which then is going to be sent to my Dolby Atmos composer. So for that, I'm going to create a bus track. And now if I press play, my audio is going to be going to my bus. You can see that now my audio from first order Ambisonics is going to my bus, which is a stereo bus. I can manipulate this bus so that it is wider, and that is what I'm going to do now. I'm gonna convert it from stereo all the way to 916. And you can see that the decoder automatically detected that there was a change to 916. So now my first order Ambisonics track is being sent to a 916 bus, and then this bus I'm going to send it to the Dolby Atmos composer, and for that I'm going to insert the beam on my bus, and you can see that now as I insert the beam, it has already detected that it's a 916 signal, and it is sending my signal to the bed. So if I press play, I will have some audio coming out. However, again, I want this audio to be a three-dimensional object. What is the point of Dolby Atmos object-based audio if I'm going to be baking stuff on a bed? For doing that with the Dolby Atmos composer is pretty easy. All I have to do is go to the pan mode and change it from composite to objects. And you can see that now here I have grabbed all the objects necessary for my three-dimensional object. And now I have my three-dimensional object and I can manipulate it, and it doesn't have to be baked on the bed. And that is pretty cool, because now I am sure that my objects are not being just in a 712 bed, but they are being sent as 916 three-dimensional objects to my listener, and it is the decoder of the listener, the one that is processing where these objects exist around their head. And the same happens with third-order Ambisonics audio. With third-order Ambisonics audio, if I insert a file here, and again I decode this third-order Ambisonics track using our AB decoder. If I press play, you have no audio. Again, that is because it has to go to a beam, and right now, from being decoded, it's just going nowhere. Again, I'm gonna send it to a bus. Let me just delete this bus that I had before. And I'm going to send it to a new bus. And if I press play, you can see that now the signal is going to my stereo bus, and all I have to do now is send this with my beam. However, before doing that, I'm just gonna make sure that this is not a stereo track, because I mean, this is an Ambisonics audio. I want something bigger. So I'm gonna set it to 916, and then I'm going to use my beam. So now the beam is sending the 916 audio to my bed. If I press play, everything should work perfectly fine. And that's how it works, but I don't want this to be baked to my bed. Just as I said before, I want it to be a three-dimensional object. All I have to do is go to my pan mode and change it from composite to objects. And you can see that now you have your signal as objects and not as the bed. So you can manipulate the signal, and whatever change you do in this signal, again, is going to be sent as metadata to the decoder of your listeners. So if I change the properties of this object, and it works really, really well. So the problem is that the Studio One doesn't support three-dimensional objects. The solution is that Dolby Atmos Composer can help you dealing with this issue. And we stop with Studio One here because it does not support Ambisonics at all. So there is no way it can support 7th order Ambisonics. And so let's move on to our next DAW and explore what it has to offer. Pro Tools is arguably the most known DAW around because it's one of the oldest, and I know that most studios around the world use it because it's a very robust DAW, especially when it comes to tracking music. When it comes to Dolby Atmos, I feel that it's becoming better and better, and I really am satisfied with the way they are handling immersive audio. Pro Tools natively supports surround sound, natively supports Dolby Atmos, it natively supports Ambisonics from 1st all the way to 7th order if you are using Pro Tools Ultimate, or to 3rd order if you are using Pro Tools Studio. And you kind of can create three-dimensional objects with a big question mark, because there is something that is really, really annoying still. However, it pretty much has almost everything I need for it to be the best DAW around. Let's just explore the DAW and see what it has to offer. So I have here an empty project, and the first thing I'm going to do is go to my I/O options, and in the Dolby Atmos, I have to make sure that my bed has been created. That's it, my Dolby Atmos project is ready, and if you go to Window, Dolby Atmos Renderer, you will open your Dolby Atmos renderer. This is your render, here is your bed, and these are your speakers, and here are your objects. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is to create a 714 master fader, just to keep track of my Dolby Atmos mix. And here I'm going to set the I/O to be my renderer. And now I'm going to be visualizing here the levels of my 714 mix. Finally, I can change the monitoring settings to be from 714 to any of these options. Right now, I'm gonna set it to 2.0 because YouTube doesn't support surround sound, so I want to make sure that you hear this video correctly. However, in my setup, I will be using it in 714 and then switching back and forth between stereo and 714 just to make sure that it sounds right. So I'm gonna set it to 2.0. And now I am ready to start working with Pro Tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is insert an ordinary stereo audio file. So I'm going to add my ordinary stereo file to my project. And as I insert it on my project, I can set it to go to my bed. And if I press play, you will see that it's going to my bed. So you can see that now the audio is going to the left and the right of my bed, and I can also control the panning of the object using the Pro Tools Panner. Or I can even open here and just control it a little bit better. And this is how the audio goes to my bed. However, I want to create an object from this audio because I want things to be written as object audio. To do that, I have to create a new object, and I have to send my audio to this object. To do it, I'm gonna have to create a couple of new objects which are going to contain my audio file. And for doing that, I'm just gonna go to my I/O and create a stereo object here. I just make sure that the format is stereo, and let's just name it stereo object. And then all I have to do is send my track to that object. And now you can see that my objects are here, and all I have to do now here is change the track from being bus to being object. And as soon as I do it, you can see that if I press play, it is now the object that is receiving the sound, and the bed is not receiving anything. And so if I open here, I can just pan my object as I want, and you will see that in my Dolby Atmos visualization, the object is going to be moving around the listener. And this is how you can work with stereo objects in Pro Tools. I really don't like the way Pro Tools display the panner, but anyway, it's something that has always been like this. There's nothing I can do to change it. However, here you have it. It is the basic panner, and here you have your stereo audio going to a stereo object. Now, let's go to our next file. What if I have a 712 audio file? Let's just first insert this file to our project, and let's just create a 714 audio track. And now I'm going to insert my file to this track. So right now, and let's send the track to the bed. So if I press play, you can see again that the audio is going to my bed. And again, if I open the panner, you can see now that the audio is going to the bed. Now, here is where complications arise. What happens if I want to pan this audio in my bed? Well, I can't, because Pro Tools doesn't include a panner for this type of 714 audio for some reason. So I'm stuck to whatever was rendered in my 714 audio. I cannot pan it, I cannot rotate it, and I cannot do anything with it. So I'm completely stuck. This is all I can do with audio that is already immersive, unfortunately. So now let's say that I want to create a three-dimensional object with this. Can I do it? Well, sort of. Like Pro Tools, Avid has inserted some sort of shortcuts that allow you to create three-dimensional objects, but you're really stuck in many ways. I mean, it's really not friendly at all. I'm gonna show you how to do it. Just create a new track, and in the type of track, just say a track preset, Dolby Atmos, and then just create the width of the object that you want. In this case, I'm gonna create a 714 objects track. And you can see that at first, there is one major problem that is really annoying here, and is that my first two objects, it has created objects for every single mono channel of my 714 audio, but my first two objects are using the objects that I have already created for my stereo track, and these objects are disabled, so I cannot use them. So every time I have to be going to my I/O and just making sure that these objects are not being used two times. So if they were, I have to change this to another ID or simply remove the previous object. Like, why cannot it handle it automatically? I have no idea. You have to do it manually. So I'm just gonna delete the object, the stereo object that I had created before, so that I just get rid of that because I'm not using anymore. And you can see that now you are using all the stereo objects. So you can see that even though Pro Tools is telling you that this is a three-dimensional object, it's not a three-dimensional object. It's just a bunch of stereo objects. So you're stuck with stereo objects. So after creating the objects, just make sure that all the objects are greened except the LFE, because there is no LFE information sent to the object. And then you're gonna send your audio to the track that you created. So once I send this audio, I am just sending the 714 audio to my folder track, which contains all the objects. It's really kind of a mess, but it works. If I press play, you will see that now you have all the objects that are required and they are playing properly. So it works. Does it work the way it should work? Yeah, well, it should work like this, but I mean, I am still stuck in the fact that it doesn't organize the objects automatically if there are not unused objects. And the worst of all is that I still cannot pan. So, I mean, I am stuck to a fixed three-dimensional object. And if I wanted to pan it, I will have to open each mono track and pan it independently. So that's what I'm stuck with. It's kind of a solution, but it's not a great solution. I mean, you're really losing the depth of an object that was otherwise completely three-dimensional. The fact that you have to pan it manually, speaker by speaker, it just becomes a mess. So yes, it kind of supports three-dimensional objects, but it doesn't really. Okay, so let's move on. Let me just remove this three-dimensional object and this track. And again, because I'm not gonna use these objects again, I have to remove them from here. Okay, now let's go to Ambisonics. So for Ambisonics, as I told you before, Pro Tools Ultimate supports Ambisonics from 1st to 7th order. So I'm going to start by adding a 1st order Ambisonics file. So for that, I'm going to create a 1st order track. And I'm going to insert my 1st order Ambisonic sound file. So as I insert it, the first thing I'm going to have to do is decode this audio to something before it's going to my Dolby Atmos renderer. So for that, I'm going to insert my AB decoder. And I can send it to any format I want. In my case, I'm just going to send it to 916. So you can see here that now it is going to a 916 signal, and I can now send it to my bed. And if I press play, you can see that now you have your information here and you can rotate it using the AB decoder, which is pretty useful. So what happens if I want to create a three-dimensional object with this? Well, we are still with the same problem. I cannot really create a three-dimensional object with Pro Tools unless I use the workaround I showed you before, which will be all about creating a new track preset, Dolby Atmos, and then a 916 object, and then making sure that everything is green. It should be green because I deleted the previous objects, and then sending this track to that 916 track. So when I press play, you will see that now you will have your 916 objects playing properly on the theater. So it works, and you can also rotate using the AB decoder. However, you cannot rotate the objects as objects for some reason. Again, Avid, why? I have no idea. You cannot rotate three-dimensional objects, so you're stuck to this. And the same happens when we go to 3rd order Ambisonics. I'm not going to delete this folder because I'm not going to create it again. I'm just going to reuse it. So I'm going to create a 3rd order track. And I'm going to insert my 3rd order Ambisonics file. Okay, after inserted, all I have to do is decode this file to something. I'm just going to use our AB decoder and decode it to 916 because I'm going to be sending it to that folder that I created before. And then I'm going to send it to my bed. I could send it to my bed, but again, we have the problem that it will be rendered on the bed. And instead, I'm going to send it to my three-dimensional object that cannot be manipulated. So now my audio is going to the three-dimensional object, and if I press play, everything should work. You can see that everything works with the objects. You cannot rotate the objects. However, you can rotate the signal using the AB decoder. At least you can rotate the signal. That beats the you cannot pan anything with Pro Tools problem, so that's a good thing. And finally, 7th order Ambisonic support is here, and I love that it's here. I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to create a 7th order track. And I'm going to insert my 7th order Ambisonics file. You can see that now we have our 7th order Ambisonics file, our 64 channel file. And again, I have to decode this before sending it anywhere. So I'm going to use our AB decoder, and I'm going to decode it to 916 because I'm going to be using the folder that I created before. And then I'm going to be sending this track to my folder. So if I press play, you can see that now you have audio in the 916 three-dimensional object that is not a three-dimensional object, but instead a bunch of stereo objects. So again, you cannot rotate this three-dimensional object. However, you can rotate the three-dimensional signal. Again, that beats the lack of panning that Avid offers. So that's pretty cool. Everything works. There is no issue here. And I mean, the only problem again is the lack of panner. Okay, so what if I wanted to use the Dolby Atmos Composer in Pro Tools so that I can solve all these panning issues that Pro Tools doesn't offer? Okay, so let's do that. For doing that, I'm just going to remove this. And I'm going to close my Dolby Atmos renderer, and I'm going to instead use my master to check on my output directly. So I'm going to be skipping the Dolby Atmos renderer that Pro Tools has. So if I again add a stereo track, let me just create stereo track. And I press play. Now my signal is going just to my stereo speakers with no Dolby Atmos renderer. So I'm going to insert in my master track the Dolby Atmos Composer. And after inserting the Dolby Atmos Composer, if I press play, you can see that there is no audio coming out, and that is because now every single track has to be sent to the composer using the Dolby Atmos, the beam from the Dolby Atmos Composer. So I'm going to insert the beam to this stereo track. And when I insert the beam, if I press play, you can see that now you have audio, right? Let me just change the speakers to be stereo so that you can hear them properly, and change the width of my bed to be 712. Okay, so now the audio is going to my bed, and I have here my two little speakers, and I can completely rotate them. And everything works fine. So if I wanted to create an object from this track, it will be as easy as simply going to the pan mode, and instead of saying composite to be objects. And you will see here that you are grabbing the two objects on the Dolby Atmos Composer. And now that means that these two tracks are objects. So if I rotate them, you can see that nothing is going to your bed, everything is being object-based, and that's what I really, really like. And it goes exactly the same if I were to insert a three-dimensional, a surround file. Let's just insert the 714 file. So the first thing I'm going to do is insert the beam. And you see that the beam already identifies all the speakers. And if I press play, everything is going to my bed. So if I convert it with the pan mode from composite to objects, you can see that now it's grabbing all the necessary objects for this track. So now that means that all the speakers are a three-dimensional object, and now I can rotate the whole three-dimensional object around the head of the listener. And that's pretty cool, because that means that now nothing is baked on the bed. I can rotate it, unlike using the normal Pro Tools workflow. So it works really, really, really well. So now let's move on to first order ambisonics. With first order ambisonics, we have exactly the same workflow. I'm just gonna create here a first order track and insert my first order file. And I'm going to insert the decoder. And I'm going to decode it to 916. And as soon as I decode it to 916, I'm gonna insert the beam so that it goes somewhere. And as I put it on the beam, if I press play, everything should work because the beam is sending the audio to the Dolby Atmos Composer. Oh, I forgot to send this to my outputs. Okay. Okay, so now you can see that everything is going to my, let me just lower the volume here a bit. Everything is going to my bed, and if I wanted to convert this to a three-dimensional object, it will be as easy as just simply going to the pan mode and set it to objects. And you will see that the Dolby Atmos Composer is now grabbing the necessary objects for this type of track. So if I select all my speakers, it works really, really, really well for the first order ambisonics track. The same happens with a third order ambisonics track. If I have a third order ambisonics recording, all I have to do is create a third order track, insert my third order file, set the output to be my output, set the decoder in higher order to be the width I want to use, in this case 916, and then after the decoder I input the beam. And you can see that now the Dolby Atmos beam has identified that it's a 916, and the 916 is coming from a third order Ambisonics file. And if I press play, it's gonna go to my bed. And to convert it to an object, all I have to do is simply the pan mode, change it from composite to objects. And you see that now it has grabbed all the necessary objects, and now everything is one three-dimensional object. Works really, really well. Finally, the same workflow goes with a 7th order Ambisonics file. All you have to do is create your 7th order track, insert your 7th order audio file, just send it to my output, and decode it to 916, and then insert the beam after the decoder. After I insert the beam after the decoder, my audio is going to be going to the bed. So if I press play, you can see that it's going to the bed. And to change it to be a three-dimensional object, again, it's just as easy as going to the pan mode and change from composite to objects. And now this is a three-dimensional object. You can see that it has grabbed all the necessary objects, and I can now rotate the signal as I please. Works really, really well. The Dolby Atmos Composer solves all the issues that we have with Pro Tools. They're not very big issues, but they're really annoying. I mean, why can't I be able to pan a three-dimensional file? Why can't it only be done with mono and stereo files? I have no idea. 2025 it is. Please fix it, Avid. I mean, it's the era of immersive audio and we're still stuck with mono and stereo stuff. This is Pro Tools. Let's just go to our next DAW. In 2024, Blackmagic released their newest version of DaVinci Resolve 19. With Resolve 19, finally, we have native support for Ambisonics up to 5th order, which is an awesome thing to include. You remember that for DaVinci version 18.5, Ambisonics was available thanks to the Audio Brewers ecosystem. Well, now it is supported natively. Other than that, DaVinci Resolve natively supports surround formats, natively supports Ambisonics now from 1st to 5th order, and it also natively supports Dolby Atmos as well as three-dimensional objects. So let's get to the DAW and explore how we can create a Dolby Atmos mix using DaVinci Resolve 19. So I have here my empty session for DaVinci Resolve, and I'm going to prepare it for a Dolby Atmos mix. I must warn you that preparing a Dolby Atmos mix in DaVinci Resolve is so difficult. I don't understand why it has to be so cumbersome when you could simply just streamline this process and do it fast. But anyway, right now you have to do it manually, so this is what we're going to do. So we have here our empty session with our stereo bus and an empty track. And the first thing that I'm going to do is prepare this bus to be the width of a Dolby Atmos track. And for doing that, I'm just gonna go to my Fairlight menu and to the bus format. And I'm gonna change the bus to be from stereo to Dolby Atmos 712, which is the width of my bed. So now that it is 712, I can just change the name of this bus to name it bed, for example. So now I'm gonna go again to Fairlight, and in the patch input output section, I'm going to set my destination to be Dolby Atmos send, and my source to be bus out. So here you have the bus that you just created, which is your 712 bus, your bed. This is 10 channels. And here you have, again, your bed with 10 channels. So what I have to do is patch this bed so that it goes to these channels. And for doing that, I'm just gonna select every channel here. And I'm gonna select the 10 first channels here of my Dolby Atmos send. So I have 10 selected, and once I click on patch, you can see that now you have the Dolby logo appearing here, because now DaVinci Resolve understands that you are working with a Dolby Atmos mix, and this is going to be your bed. So now basically you have your bed and an empty track, and you are ready to start working. So the next thing I'm going to do is, because this is YouTube and YouTube doesn't support surround sound, I'm going to downmix this project to be stereo. That way you can hear what I'm doing, If I were working in my studio, which is 714, I will be working between 714 and 2.0 just to check that it sounds well in stereo setups and in 714. But right now, I'm just going to leave it in 2.0. So now from Dolby Atmos, I am working down mixing to stereo. So the first thing I'm going to do is to drag an ordinary stereo file to my track. And as I added this stereo track, if I press play, you can see that now I am sending my stereo signal to my bed. And if I open the panner, I can just pan this around the head of the listener. But as this goes to the head of the listener, it doesn't go as an object. It goes baked in the bed, meaning that whatever you do on your computer is going to be baked on an audio file, which is the 712 of the bed. The panel can also be three-dimensional, I forgot to say. You can just change the perspectives from here. So I want to create an object because I want to be able to send this information, the position information, the spatial information of each of the channels of my stereo file. And I want to send them as metadata to the decoder of my listener so that it is that decoder that takes care of positioning these objects around the head of the listener. So what I'm going to do is convert this to an object. Now, to convert this to an object, again, is not that easy. You have to deal with DaVinci's nuances, which is going to the Fairlight menu and to the patch input and output. And then you are going to go to track direct. And here you have your two audio channels, which are the audio channels from this track. And you're going to select two sends from the Dolby Atmos send. So you have to have two selected here and two selected here. And then when you click on patch, you will see that now you're sending this to these two objects, right? And now this is an object. Make sure that after you send this to an object, you stop sending it to the bed. Because again, you have to do everything manually. DaVinci doesn't understand that you don't want to send it to both the places simultaneously. So I'm going to disable this send. And now if I press play, everything should go just to my objects and not to the bed. If I press play. You see that you can hear the audio moving around your head, but for some reason, you cannot visualize this audio anywhere in like a visualization mode like Pro Tools has or like Nuendo has. Anyway, it works. It's going as a two-dimensional object from my stereo signal. It works pretty well, so everything is done. And this is how you deal with an object with a stereo audio file. Now, what happens if you have an immersive audio file? Well, that's what I'm going to do next. I'm just going to delete this, and I'm going to insert a new file. In this case, I'm going to do a 714 file in a new track. Let's just name it. And I'm going to delete this track. I'm going to show you why. So once I delete this track, and once I have created this 714 track, the first thing I have to do is make sure that DaVinci identifies the track as a 714 track because this is a 714 file. If you expand a little bit, you will see that it doesn't. It identifies it as a 12-channel track. So to fix this, I just right-click on the track, and I change the track type to be 714. And after doing that, if I press play, everything works fine. I can again open the panel and I can rotate this signal. And it works fine, but right now it's going to my bed, meaning that whatever position change I do on my track is going to be rendered and baked into my bed. So I want to create a three-dimensional object here. Can I do it? Yes, I can do it. It's very difficult again, but it can be done because again, Resolve allows you to manually assign any channel of any track to any object. So if I go to the Fairlight menu and I open the patch input output, you can see that it remembers the old objects that we have previously routed. I'm just going to make sure just to delete this, just to keep my sanity a little bit. And I'm going to select every channel of this track that I just created, except the LFE. Make sure you deselect the LFE because the LFE channel should be omnidirectional. You should never assign the LFE channel to an object. So now that I have 11 channels selected, I'm just going to select 11 sends to the objects. And now I have selected 11 and I have selected 11. So if I press patch, now this 714 track is going to my objects. And again, I have to make sure that I do not send it to the bed. So now if I press play, everything should go to an object and not to the bed. So this works pretty well. My 714 track is being sent to a 714 object without the LFE, which is what I wanted to do. So three-dimensional objects are absolutely possible in DaVinci Resolve. So what happens if I have an Ambisonics audio file? Let's explore that. Let me just delete here. Let me just insert a first order Ambisonics file. As you can see, DaVinci will create 4 mono tracks for this file, which is so annoying. I have to first insert the Ambisonics file into the pool of DaVinci and then tell DaVinci that this is not a 4 mono wave file, but instead a 1 4-channel file. It's so complicated, but anyway, it's possible. I'm just gonna do that. So let's insert the first and the third order Ambisonics file from now. And then I'm gonna right click on the first order Ambisonics file and I'm gonna go to clip attributes. And in the audio, I'm just gonna tell this that it's not a mono file of 4 tracks, and instead it is a first order Ambisonics file. So it should look like this. You have your Ambisonics first order and channels 1, 2, 3, and 4. After you do that, it is now identified as a first order Ambisonics file. So complicated. Why? Nobody knows. Anyway, so complicated. And now this is a first order Ambisonics file, and it is correctly being interpreted for a first order Ambisonics track. So if I press play, everything should be automatically decoded and sent to the bed. Works perfectly fine. However, there is a big problem, and it is that from a first order Ambisonic to the bed, for some reason, DaVinci doesn't let me use a panner for some reason. However, this can be easily solved if I add an extra bus before the bed. So I'm going to do that. So let me just create a bus here. I'm just going to create a new bus, and this bus, let's just say, is going to be 916 Dolby Atmos. Let me just change the color so that I can remember it. And if I expand this, you can see that you have the bus. Wait, 916 bus. I have the bus here. So if I send these to my bus and then my bus to my bed, I can now pan these Ambisonics files. So basically I'm sending my first order Ambisonics file to a 916 bus, and from the 916 bus I'm sending it to the bed so that I can decode it to Dolby Atmos. So again, I can completely rotate this. Okay, so now let's create a 3-dimensional object. So now that I have created this 916 bus, I'm going to create an object with that bus, and then I'm going to send any Ambisonics audio that I have to that bus. That way, I just created the 3-dimensional object once. So for doing that, I'm just gonna go and again to the Fairlight menu and to the input-output. And let me just get rid of the previous assignments that I had done, just to keep things tidy. And now I'm going to instead of track direct, I want the output of the buses, and I want this 916 bus, everything but the LFE, remember? Which in total is 15 channels. So I'm going to select 15 channels here. So now I have 15 selected, and if I press patch, but as you can see, for some reason, when I patch this, there is no longer a panner. I don't understand why. So this means that I do have a 3-dimensional object, but I cannot pan it. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong here, but it doesn't seem to work properly. The panner disappeared, so I cannot control the 3-dimensional object. Let me just move on to a third order Ambisonics file. Again, I have to right click on this and make sure that it identifies it as a third order Ambisonics file. For some reason, it identified it as an adaptive file. So I'm just gonna go and set it to be third order Ambisonics. And let's change the height of this track to be third order Ambisonics. So if I insert this file, I have a third order ambisonic signal now going to my 916 objects. So if I press play, you can see that there is audio coming. It's working perfectly fine, but again, I cannot do anything with this object. I don't have a panel here for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, now that we're here with a third order ambisonics file, and since DaVinci Resolve supports up to fifth order ambisonics, let's take advantage of that fifth order support and upscale this third order ambisonics file. To do that, I'm going to convert this track to be fifth order ambisonics. And now that it is fifth order ambisonics, I'm going to insert to the ambisonics track my upscaler. And that's it. Without having to do anything, my signal is now fifth order ambisonics. So if I press play, everything sounds okay, but again, I cannot pan it, so I'm stuck with this. Finally, there is no support for seventh order ambisonics in DaVinci Resolve. Doesn't matter. I mean, fifth order ambisonics is a very high order, is good enough. But the fact that there is all this nuance with the Dolby Atmos routing and the lack of this panel, I'm not sure if I'm doing something wrong, but I cannot find it. I spent quite the amount of time trying to find this and I couldn't find it. It just makes everything, like the whole workflow is so difficult. So yeah, there is that. That is DaVinci. I'm going to try and solve all these issues that I had by using the Dolby Atmos Composer from Fiddler Audio. So for that, let me just go back to the beginning. Let me just remove this track, which is a bus. So I'm just removing it. And let me just, this is no longer a bed. This is going to be my output, and it's going to be a 714 because my studio is 714. And I'm going to go to the Dolby Atmos patch input output, and I'm just going to remove this. I'm just going to remove all the sends. Like that, I'm just not using anymore the Dolby Atmos renderer from DaVinci. You can see here that this doesn't have the Dolby logo anymore, and instead it just has outputs. So let me just go to the beginning and insert my stereo file. Let me just remove this. So if I press play, I have my stereo file going to my output, which is a 714 output, but you know, right now is going to the left and the right. So first thing I'm going to do is add the Dolby Atmos Composer in the master bus, which is this one. Let me just add the composer here. And if I press play now, there should be no audio. And that is because right now the composer should be the one receiving the audio and not DaVinci. And for receiving the audio, I have to beam this audio to the composer. This means that every track I create in my Dolby Atmos mix has to use the Dolby Atmos, the beam that is going to be beaming the audio to the composer. So for this stereo audio track, I'm going to insert the beam. And you can see that the beam is already identifying that this is a stereo track. It's got two channels. Let me just change the composite size to 712. This is the width of the bed. And let me just change the speakers to be 2.0 because this is YouTube. Again, it doesn't support surround, so I want you to be able to hear this properly. So this is a stereo output. So if I press play now, you can hear now that your audio is correctly being sent to the Dolby Atmos Composer to the bed. So if I wanted to create an object with this, all I have to do is change the pan mode to be from composite to objects. And now you can see that you have the two objects here. So if I press play, the audio is now going to come to the objects and not to the bed. That means that now my audio from my object is not going to the bed, is not being baked in the bed, and instead is being sent to the objects, and the positioning metadata is being saved in the ADM Dolby Atmos file. This is an awesome thing. So if I were to be working with a 714 file, the same will apply, which is, first of all, just make sure that this is a 714 track. Let me just delete the previous track. And now that I am sure that this is a 714 track, I'm going to insert the beam. And you can see that the beam is already grabbing the 714 nature of this track and is sending it to the Dolby Atmos composer. So it's sending it to the bed. You can see that if I press play, is the bed that is receiving the audio. So if I wanted to create a three-dimensional object with this, it's very easy. All I have to do in the pan mode is change this from composite to objects. And you can see that now I'm grabbing the necessary objects for this 714 track to be a three-dimensional object. All I have to do to pan it is just pan it from the Dolby Atmos bin. And it works pretty well. It's pretty easy to achieve. Everything happens within the Dolby Atmos composer. The same happens when I'm using Ambisonics audio. Let me just add this Ambisonics audio file to a new track. And let me delete this track. So if I expand this track, you can see that it is seeing it properly as an Ambisonics track. However, because it is DaVinci Resolve that is decoding this track to my format, I cannot insert the beam in the track because the beam has to be inserted after the decoder. So to solve this, I have to create a new bus, which is going to be the width of my three-dimensional object. So let me just go to Fairlight, and in bus format, I'm going to create a new bus. Let me just name it 916 bus and make it 916 and change the color so that I can have a little bit organized everything. So you see that you have the 916 bus here, and all I have to do now is send my Ambisonics track to this bus and not to the output. So I'm just gonna remove this output here, and I'm gonna add the 916 send. So now this is being sent to my 916 bus, and now the 916 bus is the one who has to go to the Dolby Atmos composer. So I'm just gonna route this to the outputs, and I am going to insert in the 916 bus the Dolby Atmos beam. And you can see that the beam is correctly identifying the 916 nature of this track and is sending it to the bed. So if I press play, everything works fine. And if I wanted to create a three-dimensional object with this first order Ambisonics file, all I will have to do is change the pan mode from composite to objects. And you can see here that it has grabbed all the necessary objects for this to be a three-dimensional object. So now if I press play, this is now a three-dimensional object from a first-order Ambisonics file. It's pretty cool because now this file that was Ambisonics, meaning that it was speaker agnostic, is being decoded to a 916 three-dimensional object, meaning that all the information of the positioning is being sent to the decoder of your listener. So we can do the same with the third-order Ambisonics file. Now that I have created my bus, my 916 bus, I'm just gonna reuse that bus so that I don't have to insert the Dolby Atmos beam again. So I'm just going to delete this audio file, and I'm gonna change this to be third-order Ambisonics, this track. And I'm going to insert my third-order Ambisonics audio file. And because everything is ready, it's being already sent to the bus, and the bus is already sending to the composer, everything should just work. So now this is going already to the three-dimensional object that I have previously created. Now, if I want to increase the resolution of this third-order Ambisonics file, all I have to do in DaVinci Resolve is simply increase the order of this track. I'm just gonna, to the max, I'm just gonna increase it to fifth order, and then insert Audio Brewers upscaler in the Ambisonics track. I don't have to do anything else. The Audio Brewers upscaler is already dealing with upscaling the resolution of this Ambisonics file from third to fifth order. And it is Fiddler Audio, the Dolby Atmos beam, that is sending this to the Dolby Atmos composer as a three-dimensional object. So this is the ultimate resolution here. And that is DaVinci Resolve. As you can see, it's a pretty robust DAW. The fact that they now support Ambisonics up to 5th order is pretty cool for Dolby Atmos, for working in Dolby Atmos. However, I still feel that it is so difficult to keep track of the objects of the beds, and everything has to be done manually. I feel that there is a huge gap between the user and what the software can do. And this thing of the panner, I still don't understand why it happens. It shouldn't happen. The fact that it doesn't disable the send to the bed once you send to an object automatically, like you have to keep track of so many things that could be automated easily from the software itself. However, there is still a lot of potential for this to become a mainstream DAW. I really hope for what there is to come for DaVinci Resolve in 2025. Logic is the well-known DAW created by Apple, and in 2024, version 11 was released, bringing absolutely nothing new to the world of immersive audio or spatial audio. I feel that between version 10 and version 11, it's pretty much the same when it comes to mixing Dolby Atmos. It is still obviously compatible with surround sound and Dolby Atmos, but it's still not compatible with three-dimensional objects, and it's still not compatible with Ambisonics audio unless you are using the Audio Brewers ecosystem that will bring you Ambisonics up to 1st order. So let's get to the DAW and explore what it can do for us when we are working with our Dolby Atmos mix. So I have an empty project here, and the first thing I'm going to do is make it Dolby Atmos compatible. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my mix menu and open the Dolby Atmos option, and then I'm going to set the spatial audio to be Dolby Atmos. It'll tell me that it's going to convert my project to 712. I'm just gonna say yes. And that's it. You don't have to do anything else. It is now a Dolby Atmos project. If you open the renderer, you can see that here you have the Dolby Atmos renderer. And if you open the sidebar, you can see that you have your bed and your objects, which by now they're empty. So the first thing I'm going to do is drag an ordinary stereo file. And after I drag this file, if I press play, you can see that you have some audio playing. Let me just lower the volume here. And now my stereo file is being played through my bed. To pan this stereo file on my bed, all I will have to do is open the panner and simply pan this somehow around the head of the listener. And that is it. You can see that everything is being panned nicely on the bed. However, I don't want to pan this on the bed because I want this to be an object. So for this to be an object, all I will have to do is simply right-click on the panner and set it to be a 3D object panner. As soon as I do it, you will see that now your object has appeared here and your panner has changed completely. Now this is an object panner. So if I were to pan this around the head of the listener, everything is going to be panned as an object and not baked on the bed. So if I press play again and start messing with it, let me just lower the volume. And like that, everything should simply work nicely. Now, this is a stereo file that has been sent as a stereo object to my Dolby Atmos mix, meaning that whatever I do around the head of the listener is not being baked on the bed, but it's being sent as metadata to the decoder of the person who is listening to your music. And that is pretty cool. So let's move on to an immersive audio type of file. I'm going to close this. I'm going to delete this audio file, and I'm going to insert a new WAV file. This time is going to be a 714 WAV file. And let me just delete this track. And you can see that as I insert this track, Dolby is already identifying it as a surround track. And if I press play, everything should go to the bed with no problems. And everything is going to the bed with no problems. And if I were to pan this around the head of the listener, I only will have to open the panner and do the same thing that I did with the stereo track, which is to pan it around the head. and everything works nicely. However, what if I wanted to create a three-dimensional object with this 714 file? If I right-click here on the panel, you will see that there is no object panel on surround file, which completely defeats the purpose of object-based three-dimensional audio. You cannot have three-dimensional manipulation with a three-dimensional audio file. So that means that you're stuck to mono or stereo objects, and you cannot create three-dimensional objects. So this is pretty much everything you can do with Logic here. Only have mono or stereo objects, and that is it. And now let's explore Ambisonics file. As I told you before, Logic is still not natively compatible with Ambisonics. However, thanks to the Audio Brewers ecosystem, you can load files of up to first order Ambisonics. To do that, I'm gonna go to the File and Import menu, and I'm going to import a new audio file, and I'm going to select my first order Ambisonics file and import it. You can see that now it has been added to my track. It has been identified like as a surround file. Let me just change the name of this track. And now this is my first order Ambisonics file. So you must remember that before this first order Ambisonics goes to the real world, you have to decode it. To do that, all you have to do is insert AB decoder to your track. And then, because I am sending this to my bed, I'm gonna set the decoder to B712. And as soon as I press play, you can see that everything is going nicely to the bed in 712. If I wanted to rotate this, I will use the rotator from the AB decoder and not the rotator from Logic. It will be pretty easy just doing this. And that is all that you will have to do, nothing else. Again, you cannot create a three-dimensional object with this audio because it's in immersive audio and Logic doesn't allow you to create three-dimensional objects. So this is pretty much everything you can do in Logic. If you want to if you want to work with an immersive audio file in a Dolby Atmos mix, you definitely have to send it to your bed because you cannot do anything else. Now, how can we solve this? Well, there is the Dolby Atmos Composer to the rescue. With Dolby Atmos Composer, we have the possibility to cover all the problems that Logic gives us. So I'm gonna go back to the beginning and create an empty project again. Now I have created here my empty project, and the first thing that I'm going to do is insert a stereo file. So if I insert the stereo file and I press play, you can see here that it is the normal, the ordinary Logic that everybody knows. And now I'm going to convert this session to a Dolby Atmos session using the Dolby Atmos Composer. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, instead of sending this to the stereo bus, I'm going to send it to the surround bus so that I can see here the surround bus. And in the surround bus, I'm going to insert the Dolby Atmos Composer. And as I insert the Dolby Atmos Composer, you can see that the instance of the renderer has been inserted. And if I press play, you cannot hear any audio. And that is because now, from now on, every single track that you insert in Logic has to contain a Dolby Atmos beam, which is going to be beaming the audio to the Dolby Atmos Composer. And that's what I'm going to do in this track now. So in the insert of the track, I'm just going to insert the beam. And you can see here that the beam is already identifying that this is a stereo audio track and is sending this to my bed, which is a 916, but the bed, I want it to be 712. And that's it, you don't have to do anything else. If I were to play this, you can see that your audio is now going to your bed. And if you wanted to rotate this audio, all you will have to do is just rotate it from the Dolby Atmos beam. And that works pretty well, but let's just say that I want to convert this to an object. Well, with the Dolby Atmos beam, it's really easy. All I will have to do is go to the pan mode, and instead of composite, I just select objects, and you will see that now I'm grabbing two objects from the Dolby Atmos renderer. And whatever change I do now on this object is gonna be saved as metadata in the Dolby Atmos file and not baked in the bed. So if I rotate this, you can see that now the changes are being simply reflected as an object, and the bed is not being populated at all. And this is how you create an object with the Dolby Atmos Composer. Now, let's just say that I have an immersive audio file. Let's just say that I have a 714 audio file. I'm going to insert one of these files here in my project, and I'm going to delete this track. And now here I have my 714. If I press play, I'm not going to have any audio because I haven't inserted the beam. You can see that I have no audio here. So the first thing I'm going to do is insert a beam in this track. So as I insert a beam, you can see that the Dolby Atmos beam is already identifying that this is a 712 file, even though it is a 714 file. That is because Logic is stuck to mono, stereo, or 712 tracks, because it just doesn't give you the flexibility of creating tracks with different widths. Well, this is a 712 file now, and this is what I'm gonna have to be working with. So again, this is now going to my bed, and if I press play, you can see that the audio is going to the bed, and I can rotate it. And it works well despite of it being limited to the width of the bed, which is 712. Now, there is one thing that Dolby Atmos Composer saves the day here, and that is the three-dimensional objects. I still can create a three-dimensional object with this 712 beam by going to the pan mode and instead of composite, selecting objects. As soon as I select objects, you can see here that the Dolby Atmos Composer is grabbing the necessary objects, and now whatever change I do on my beam is gonna be saved as metadata and not as a baked bed. And that works pretty well. It's really much more practical and real than the included renderer in Logic. And it just opens so many more possibilities. And finally, I'm just gonna go with an Ambisonics file. With an Ambisonics file, all I have to do is insert my Ambisonics audio file by going to the File, Import, Audio File, and then I'm going to select my first order Ambisonics file and insert it in my project. And just change the name of this. And right before the beam, I have to make sure I insert a decoder. So you have to insert the decoder, decode this audio to 712, you cannot decode it to anything else, and then send it to the beam to the Dolby Atmos Composer. That's what I'm going to do. So before the Dolby Atmos beam, I'm going to insert the AB decoder plugin. And I'm gonna make sure that AB decoder is decoding the audio to 712. And if I press play, you can see now that the audio is being properly decoded to 712, and then this 712 signal is being sent to my 712 three-dimensional object. And with this 712 three-dimensional object, I can manipulate the rotation, the elevation, or whatever properties I want from this object. And this is how you can work with Ambisonics and three-dimensional objects in Logic. It is really like 10 steps ahead of what Logic can natively do. It opens so many doors, and it gives you so much more flexibility when you're working with real immersive audio. Like if you have an Ambisonics microphone, this is the way you should be approaching immersive audio and Dolby Atmos mixes in Logic. So as you can see, Logic comes with a lot of flaws, but Dolby Atmos Composer pretty much solves most of them. However, the fact that it lacks of flexible tracks, it really sets so many obstacles in the process of mixing. Like, why can't I add a quad track and a 712 track and a 916 track in the same mix? Why can't I do that? Why do I have to be stuck to mono, stereo, and 712? I don't know, but this is how Logic works, and it is what it is. And like that, we have finished exploring the DAWs that provide us with support for immersive audio and for Dolby Atmos mixes. I know that there are many other DAWs in the market out there. However, I wanted to focus on those that natively support not only Dolby Atmos, but also immersive audio within the DAW itself without having to use third-party utilities. Now, let's go to the ranking and see what there is to say about each of the DAWs. And just like a year ago, we have a list of disqualified DAWs. These are Luna, Bitwig, Cakewalk, and Ableton. These DAWs, I know you can use them to create Dolby Atmos mixes or immersive audio in some ways. However, they don't natively support surround tracks, they don't natively support ambisonics track. You can only create mono or stereo tracks with them, and then you can route them through Dolby Atmos renderers or through ambisonics encoders, but they don't natively support surround sound, and this is why they are still disqualified. There is no update from them on immersive audio. And in the 6th place, we have Logic. There has been pretty much no changes since 2024. The version 11 of Logic is exactly the same when it comes to mixing in Dolby Atmos. You still don't have flexible tracks. You're still stuck to mono or stereo objects. You still don't have support for ambisonics. You still don't have support for tracks that I can choose different types of widths. And you're pretty much still stuck with whatever you have, and you can do nothing to solve this. So this is why I'm giving it the 6th place, because it pretty much has not changed since last year. The 5th place, I'm gonna give it to DaVinci Resolve. I was about to give the 4th place to it. However, when I started doing this video, I remembered how difficult it was to create a Dolby Atmos mix, how cumbersome it was to have to use this patcher to manually patch the bed and the objects, and if I forget something on the way, I just screw all my mix. Like, why cannot be streamlined? Why does it have to be manual? Like, a sound engineer needs these tools like a million times a day. You cannot just allow us to just always do this manually. There has to be an automated way of dealing with all this routing. So this is why I decided to keep it on the 5th place. Even though now they support ambisonics up to 5th order, which is a huge leap, like starting a mix in Dolby Atmos is still very difficult, and this is why I left it on the 5th place. The 4th place, I was about to give it to Studio One 7. I was about to put Studio One in the 5th place. However, DaVinci was so complicated and Studio One is so easy to set up that I really decided to leave it on the 4th place. However, Studio One still doesn't support ambisonics, Studio One still doesn't support 3-dimensional objects, and Studio One doesn't really support flexible tracks beyond 16 channels. So you really are stuck in things that could allow us to open new doors to immersive audio. However, it's so easy to set up that I decided to give it the 4th place. On the 3rd place, I'm going to put Pro Tools. Pro Tools has improved a lot in the last years. It now gives you support for 1st order ambisonics all the way to 7th order ambisonics. It gives you an embedded Dolby Atmos renderer, but the fact that you cannot pan immersive tracks, the fact that you cannot create real 3-dimensional objects is really annoying. Like, you're almost there, Avid. Why not completing Pro Tools to make it the best DAW? All you have to do is allow us to create 3-dimensional objects that we can manipulate, we can rotate the way Nuendo does. Like, this will make it the best DAW. However, the fact that you don't have this, it just makes me not want to use it at all to mix Dolby Atmos, because I know that I'm just going to crash against that brick wall. The 2nd place, I'm gonna give it to Reaper. And hear me out here. To me, Reaper is the very best DAW that there is in the market, period. Is the DAW that I use the most, is the DAW that I use for sound design, for sample editing, for recording, for testing our plugins. It is the go-to DAW here at Audio Brewers. However, the fact that it doesn't include a Dolby Atmos renderer, and I understand why it doesn't do it, but because this video is about Dolby Atmos mixing, it just makes it subpar compared to the 1st place. However, Reaper is my favorite DAW. You can support every single type of audio that there is, and if you are using Dolby Atmos Composer, is by far the best DAW that there is. However, you still need the Dolby Atmos Composer, which makes Reaper on its own unusable for Dolby Atmos mixing. And on the 1st place, I'm gonna put Cubase or Nuendo. It still keeps the 1st place because not only does it now support 4th order ambisonics, but it includes everything I need from the DAW itself. Like, it includes support for ambisonics from 1st order all the way to 4th order. It contains an ambisonics decoder included, even though I use our decoder because I like it better. And it creates 3-dimensional objects, and it includes a Dolby Atmos Atmos renderer. So pretty much all you need is Cubase or Nuendo, and you don't need anything else to create a Dolby Atmos mix. And this is why I am giving it a first place. However, I really wish that it could support 7th order Ambisonics just to make it the best DAW. Like, if it would support 7th order Ambisonics, it would be by far the best DAW that there is in the market. And a special mention, again, I want to give to Dolby Atmos Composer, which to me is the most useful plugin when it comes to solving all the issues, all the nuances that all the DAWs give you, because Dolby Atmos Composer allows you to mix in Dolby Atmos to create three-dimensional objects, to bridge between Ambisonics audio and three-dimensional objects in a couple of clicks. It just makes everything so much easier in DAWs that will make things otherwise very, very complicated. So thank you, Dolby Atmos Composer, for existing. I will definitely be using it more and more every time I use different DAWs that are not compatible with Dolby Atmos. Well, and this is the end of this video. I really hope that you find it useful. I really hope that it helps you find which is the DAW that you're going to be using for 2025 for mixing your music or your projects in Dolby Atmos. My name is Alejandro, and if you have any comments, if you have any questions, just don't hesitate to leave them in the comments section below. I will see you on the next one. Cheers!